Some stories are better heard with someone else. But you're here alone. Welcome to Don't Listen Alone. This is 100% ad-free, just you and whatever comes next. Drop your location and the time before we begin. Now, listen carefully. Not everything you hear is part of the story. I still remember that Thursday as if it just happened yesterday. It was an ordinary workday in our small publishing house, nothing special on the calendar, no big meeting, no looming deadline, just a regular day when people come in, greet each other, sit down at their desks, and try to survive another 8 hours in front of a computer. Our office is on one floor of an old building, with rows of cubicles, fluorescent lights, and the constant smell of paper and ink. If you look at it from the outside, it seems normal, almost boring. But if you ask the people who stay late, or who are sensitive to these things, they will tell you that ordinary is not really the right word for this place. There have always been stories about our floor, especially from people who stay beyond 6 in the evening. They say they hear keyboards tapping when everyone has already gone home, as if someone is still typing an article in the dark. They talk about small scratching sounds on desks, papers rustling when the air is still, footsteps in the corridor when no one is walking there, and objects dropping on the floor with no one to knock them off. Some people just laugh and say the building is old, so of course it makes noises, but others, especially the ones who have worked here for years, only give this knowing smile and say, "You'll get used to them." I am not someone with a strong third eye or anything like that, but I am not totally closed-minded either. When enough people tell you the same thing over and over, you start to think maybe there is something there, even if you cannot fully see it. The editor who had my position before me once told me that he often saw a silhouette of a woman in our manager's cubicle. He said he got so used to it that sometimes he would just ignore her, like she was another coworker who did not talk much. At first I thought he was joking, just trying to scare me because I was new. But later, over time, even I started noticing something like that from the corner of my eye. I would pass by that cubicle and feel like someone was sitting there, even though when I looked closely the chair was empty. It would happen often enough that it stopped being a question of, "Did I really see that?" and turned into, "Okay, she's there again." So when I tell you this story, I am not trying to sound dramatic. I am just sharing what happened as clearly as I can, because that day was different even for an office that was already used to strange little things. The office day officially starts at 8, but a lot of us like to arrive a bit earlier to have some quiet time before the phones start ringing and email notifications begin popping up. That Thursday morning I arrived at the office around 7:30. The building was still half asleep. The hallway lights were on, but the air felt cooler and calmer than usual. There were only a few people around, mostly the security guard downstairs, the receptionist, and a couple of employees who also liked to come early. I took the elevator up to our floor, listened to the soft ding as the doors opened, and walked into the empty corridor leading to our department. Our section is at the far corner, so I have to walk past other departments before I reach the row of cubicles where my team sits. As I stepped into our area, the familiar layout greeted me, cubicles lined up in 2 neat rows, each one with a nameplate, a chair, a computer, and a mess of papers, notebooks, and personal items that made them feel a little more human. The overhead lights were on, but they were not yet at their brightest, so the whole place still had this soft, early morning feeling. My manager, Mina, has a cubicle right next to the glass wall that faces the hallway. Her space is easy to see from many angles, and I got used to glancing there every time I came in, partly to say good morning, partly to see if she had beaten me to the office. That morning was no different. I walked past her cubicle and, out of habit, I turned my head slightly and said, "Good morning, Mina," while continuing to walk toward my own desk. As I passed, I saw something in my peripheral vision, a shape where her chair was supposed to be. It looked like a figure sitting there, the way she usually did, facing her computer, with her back slightly curved, her head bowed a little. It felt normal, because my body and mind were so used to that view. I did not immediately turn my head to look directly at her cubicle. I just continued walking and replied automatically, like it was just another day. But that moment stretched inside my mind. even though my mouth said, "Good morning." Another part of my brain whispered, "Wait, Mina isn't here." And that thought froze my steps. I stopped for a moment and looked back toward her cubicle properly. The chair was empty. Her desk was neat, with her mug, her pen holder, and her stack of documents, but there was no one sitting there. The figure I thought I had seen from the side was gone. There was just an empty chair, silent and ordinary. I stood there in the middle of the aisle, trying to decide if my half-asleep brain had simply imagined her. It was early. Maybe my eyes were still adjusting. But something about that split-second shape had felt solid, not like a shadow or a trick of light. Trying not to overthink, I went to my own cubicle and started my usual morning routine. I put my bag down, turned on my computer, and sat waiting for it to boot up. The startup sound of the computer filled the quiet air. I was still thinking about the empty chair when I heard someone stand up from a nearby cubicle. It was my coworker, Tricia. She is one of my closest friends in the office, someone I share a lot of casual conversations with. She stretched, looked around, and I called her name just to say hi. She turned toward me and surprised me with her first question of the day. "Hey, did Mina arrive already?" she asked, her eyes drifting toward the manager's cubicle. I shook my head. "No, she isn't here yet." She frowned a little. "Really? I saw someone sitting on her chair earlier. I thought it was her." Our eyes met for a second. That look we exchanged said more than any words. It was the kind of look that says, "You saw something too, didn't you?" I nodded slowly and told her that I had just passed by and said good morning because I thought I saw her there, only to find the cubicle empty a moment later. Tricia smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was that odd smile you make when something is familiar and strange at the same time. For the two of us, this was not a completely new thing. We had already shared small experiences about the office, about the silhouette in Mina's cubicle, about the footsteps late at night. We had this habit of talking about it, and then laughing a little to push the fear away. So we did the same thing then. We joked that Mina had a very hard-working double, who came earlier than her. We laughed, even if there was a small chill at the back of our necks. Time passed. A few more people arrived. The office slowly filled with the sound of greetings, the hum of computers, the clack of keyboards. Around 8, our coworker Candy came in. She is the type who always smiles and greets everyone she passes, whether she knows them well or not. I saw her walking along the aisle, heading to her cubicle at the opposite end. She passed by Mina's cubicle as usual, and, without really looking, said, "Good morning, Mina," in her cheerful voice. At that time, Tricia and I both noticed it but did not say anything yet. The scene looked normal, a coworker walking past, greeting another coworker in a chair. Except that in reality, we knew that chair was empty. For the next few minutes, everything seemed fine. People settled down at their desks, opened emails, checked their tasks. The office moved through its usual slow morning rhythm. Then, suddenly, Candy stood up from her cubicle and walked quickly toward Mina's area, carrying a few papers in her hands. She stopped beside the empty chair, looked down, and froze. I saw her body stiffen and her expression change from casual to shocked. A second later she stepped back and let out a small cry, not too loud, but enough for the people around to hear. "Where's Mina?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. I just saw her here earlier. I even greeted her." Tricia and I looked at each other again, and then at Candy. We both stood up from our seats and went closer. "Mina's absent today," we told her. "She didn't come in. We were just talking about it earlier. We saw her too, or thought we saw her." Candy's eyes widened. Her face lost some color. "No, seriously," she said. "I passed by earlier and I swear she was sitting right there. I saw her hair, her shoulders, the way she sits. It was her. I didn't really look at her face because I was rushing, but I know I saw someone there." The three of us stood there beside the empty cubicle, the morning light from the fluorescent bulbs reflecting off the blank computer screen. The chair remained empty, silent, real. But all three of us, at different moments that morning, had seen the same thing, Mina sitting there when she actually was not in the office at all. We tried to brush it off again, to turn it into another office ghost story, but there was something different about having so many people experience the same thing in one day. We went back to our work, yet the feeling stayed with us, like a shadow standing at the edge of our thoughts. The day moved forward. At 2 in the afternoon, the office was busy as usual. People were answering emails, talking softly, or going to and from the pantry. The lunch sleepiness was fading and everyone was trying to focus. While I was editing a document, I noticed our coworker Tony coming toward our cluster of cubicles. Tony works in another section but often crosses to our side when he needs something from Mina or from our team. He always looks calm, rarely surprised by anything, so when he came over that day, I did not expect anything unusual. "Hey," he said, resting one hand on the divider between our cubicles. "Is Mina around?" I turned in my chair and shook my head again. "No, she's absent today." His eyebrows went up. "Absent? Are you sure? That's strange. I thought I saw her this morning. And she even sent me a message on Facebook asking if Irish was here." Tricia glanced up from her desk, and Candy, who was within earshot, also looked over. "What do you mean?" I asked. "She messaged me," Tony explained. "This morning, she sent me a chat asking, 'Is Irish there already?' I wondered why she had to ask me that when she could just stand up and check, because I thought she was already here." He scratched his head, clearly bothered by the small inconsistency. "But since she messaged," I replied. "Then I went to my cubicle and I'm pretty sure I saw her at her desk earlier. I just assumed she came in quietly." We told him the whole story from that morning, how we had already seen Mina at her cubicle even though she was not really there, how Candy had greeted her and later realized the chair was empty. Tony listened carefully, his calm face slowly losing its relaxed look. "So you're telling me she was never here?" he said. "But I saw her. And she messaged me. Did any of you message her or pretend to be her?" We all shook our heads. None of us had touched Mina's Facebook account, of course. That was hers alone. We did not have her password, and even if we did, we would never use it to play a joke. The more we thought about it, the more uneasy we became. It was one thing to see a figure sitting in a chair. It is another thing entirely when a real message appears on someone's phone or computer, using the name and account of a person who is not physically present. Before we could talk further, another voice joined the conversation. It was Irish, our other manager, the one Tony had mentioned. She sits a few cubicles away and had stood up when she heard her name. She walked over and asked Tony, "You said Mina messaged you this morning asking if I was here?" "Yes," he said. "She did." Irish frowned and crossed her arms. "That's weird," she said slowly. "Because this morning, before 10, I heard Mina's voice. I thought she was talking to someone from your group." She looked at all of us, her eyes serious. "I was here at my desk and I heard her. The tone, the way she laughs a bit at the end of her sentences, I'm sure it was her. I almost stood up to say hi, but I thought she was busy talking to one of you." The room went quiet for a few seconds. We were all thinking the same thing. Mina was not at the office that day. We knew that. She had informed us beforehand that she would be absent due to a family matter. We had all been working with the knowledge that she was nowhere near the building. And yet, throughout the day, different people had experienced her in some way. I saw her shape from the side and greeted her. Tricia saw her sitting on her chair. Candy passed by and greeted her, confident she was there. Tony saw her, received a message from her account, and assumed she was quietly working. Irish heard her voice nearby, talking as if everything was normal. Each of us had a piece of her presence, scattered in different senses: sight, sound, written message. None of us could say we imagined it alone, because the stories matched up in a strange way. Our unit felt the change in the atmosphere. It was like the air grew heavier, a bit colder, and everyone became more aware of every small sound. Even people who usually laugh off ghost stories were unusually quiet. Still, the work had to go on. It was the middle of the day and deadlines do not wait for anyone, living or dead. So we forced ourselves to return to our desks, to keep typing and editing and printing as if nothing unexplained had just woven itself into our routine. We thought that was the last of it, at least for that day. But before the afternoon ended, another piece of the puzzle appeared. One of our coworkers, Amber, who is deaf, joined our small group in the pantry during a break. Amber communicates with us using a mixture of sign language, writing, and lip reading. She is very observant because she relies mainly on her eyes, and sometimes she notices things that the rest of us miss. While we were talking, she signaled that she wanted to share something. We watched her hands as she signed and also listened as she described some parts slowly in her voice. She told us that in the morning, she had been walking along the corridor near our office. As she moved past the row of cubicles, she saw someone standing there, smiling at her. It was Mina. In Amber's memory, Mina was standing in the corridor, not seated, wearing her usual work clothes, and smiling at her in a friendly way. Amber smiled back and continued walking, thinking nothing of it. To her, it was like any normal morning greeting. She did not hear a voice, of course. But the image was clear. When we told her that Mina had been absent the whole day, her reaction was immediate. Her eyes grew big, her eyebrows went up, and she mouthed, "Talaga?" with a look of pure surprise. She repeated that she was sure it was Mina she had seen, that the face, the hair, the smile were very familiar. We all watched her reaction, and whatever doubt we had left became very small. This was no longer one or two people imagining they saw something. By then at least 5 of us had seen, heard, or interacted with Mina that day, in different places, at different times, even though the real Mina had never stepped into the building. The following morning, when everyone was back in the office, we decided to tell Mina herself about what had happened. She arrived looking tired but calm. She placed her bag on her desk, turned on her computer, and greeted us. We gathered around her cubicle and began to share the story. At first she laughed nervously and said we were probably just playing a joke on her. But as more of us talked and each person shared their own version of what they had experienced, her smile slowly disappeared. Her face turned serious, then a little pale. She listened carefully, asking small questions here and there. She wanted to know exactly what time each thing happened, whether anyone saw her face clearly, whether she was wearing certain clothes in our memories. We answered as best as we could. I told her about greeting her near her cubicle. Tricia described seeing her from the back. Candy explained how she had passed and greeted her without really looking but could still swear someone was there. Tony mentioned the Facebook message and his memory of seeing her. Irish talked about hearing her voice. Amber repeated, through signs and simple words, that she saw Mina smiling at her in the hallway. By the time we finished telling everything, Mina's hands were slightly shaking. She looked around at all of us and finally admitted that she was scared. She told us that while she was absent that day, she had been dealing with a serious family matter. Her grandmother had been sick for some time, and they had been taking turns watching over her. A week after that strange Thursday, her grandmother passed away. When she told us this, the whole group fell silent once again. We did not know what to say. Was what happened in the office somehow related to her grandmother's condition? Was it a warning, a sign, something trying to prepare her or us? Or was it simply one of those unexplained situations where a person's image appears many times in a place they love or spend a lot of time in, just before something major changes in their life? I thought about it many times after that. The timing felt too close to ignore. Mina's double showed up in the office many times in one day while she was physically away, dealing with a sick grandmother. Then, a week later, that grandmother died. I could not help but feel that the two events were connected somehow, even if I could not explain how. Maybe it was a part of Mina's spirit that was pulled between home and work, trying to balance her responsibilities. Maybe it was some other entity choosing her image because it was familiar to us. Or maybe it was a gentle message, a way of telling us that a big change was coming, that someone important in her life was about to leave. I am not an expert in these things. I can only guess and feel and remember. Mina herself tried to make sense of it. She confessed that on the days she was absent, she kept thinking about work even while she was at home, watching over her grandmother. She worried about deadlines, about meetings, about unfinished tasks. She said she kept seeing the office in her mind and feeling guilty about not being there. Maybe, she joked weakly, she wanted to be in two places at once so badly that a part of her actually went to the office. We all laughed a little at that idea, but at the same time, none of us could completely dismiss it. People always say that sometimes, when a person is under stress, or when they are very attached to a place, their energy leaves traces there. Maybe that was what we saw. Before the conversation ended, Mina looked at us with a serious expression. She said that if anything like that ever happened again, if anyone saw her in the office when she was not really there, if anyone heard her voice when she was absent, or if any of us felt her presence strangely, we should tell her immediately. She did not want to be left in the dark about such things. Even if it scared her, she preferred to know rather than wonder. We all agreed, promising to inform her right away if anything similar ever occurred. Since then, the office has gone back to its usual rhythm. People still stay late sometimes and still hear those familiar strange sounds. The phantom keyboard tapping, the soft scratching on wooden desks, the faint footsteps. The silhouette in Mina's cubicle sometimes appears again, just like before. But that one Thursday remains different in my memory. It was not just a random glimpse or a passing shadow. It was as if the office itself was trying to remind us that there are things we cannot see or fully understand, that people we care about might leave traces of themselves in more than one place, that sometimes, even when someone is absent, they are not completely gone. Every time I walk past Mina's cubicle now, I still say good morning. I look properly to see if she is really there, sitting in her chair, fingers on the keyboard, eyes on the screen. Most of the time, she is. Sometimes, when she is absent and her cubicle is empty, I still feel that small flutter in my chest, the memory of that morning when I greeted her and saw her shape, only to realize that the chair was actually empty. On those days, I walk a little faster, sit down at my own desk, and silently hope that wherever she is, she and her family are all right, and that if any message ever comes again from beyond what we can see, we will have the courage to notice it, share it, and try our best to understand what it might be trying to say. When I first entered the university, I did not only step into an old campus, I felt like I was stepping into a place that had already seen so many lives, stories, and even deaths long before I was born. The university was founded in 1901, during the American occupation of the Philippines, and it had this strong sense of history that you could feel in the way the buildings looked and even in the way the air moved through the hallways. People always said that this was where the Thamasites, those American teachers who came to the country, built a school to train Filipino educators, so from the beginning it was a place full of hope, learning, and big dreams, but at the same time it carried the weight of war and changing times. The girls' dormitory where I stayed for 4 years was said to have been built around the same time as the university itself, and it was not just any building. The old teachers would sometimes tell us that during the war it had been used as a hospital, and whenever they told that story they would always mention the kitchen of the canteen downstairs. In the middle of that kitchen there was a wide white table that always looked a bit strange to me. It was too big and too solid, and even though we just saw it as a place where staff chopped vegetables and placed trays, the older people would quietly say that long ago, that same table had been used as a morgue, where bodies were laid out after surgeries or battles. Knowing that made the simple act of walking through the canteen feel different, because in your mind you could not help but imagine what else that table had seen. The dormitory had a nickname that almost every occupant knew. We called it Normal Hell. It sounded playful when you said it out loud, almost like a joke, but it came from the stories of possession and strange events that had happened there over many years. It was the kind of nickname that made new students laugh nervously, while the older ones just smiled and said, "You'll understand soon." People told stories about girls suddenly collapsing, screaming with voices that did not sound like their own, or acting in ways that they could not remember afterward. The staff tried to explain some of the incidents by saying the girls were just under stress, tired from their studies, or influenced by their imagination. But in a place with such a long history, and so many shadows, you could never be sure. There was also a ghost at the dormers named Dante. I never saw Dante myself, but I heard enough descriptions of him to almost form a picture in my mind. Some said he appeared in the hallways, others swore they saw him near the stairs or by the bathroom door, and the way they talked about him made it seem like he was almost part of the building, the same way the old tiles or the wooden banisters were. During the day, the dormitory was noisy and full of life. Girls rushed in from their classes, books in their arms, chatter filling the hallways. But even in the middle of all that normal activity, the building liked to remind us that it had another, stranger side. The bathroom on each floor was a place where everyone passed through at some point during the day, and yet it was also where many of the small, playful incidents happened. You could be standing in line with several other girls waiting to take a shower or brush your teeth, and then suddenly, for no reason, a faucet would turn on even though no one was near it. Sometimes it would turn off again, as if some invisible hand had finished using it. There were also times when a toilet would flush by itself, the sound echoing through the tiled room, while all of us looked at one another just to make sure that it was not one of us pulling a prank. The light switches would also click on and off without anyone touching them, especially in the late afternoon when the light from the windows was too dim, and we still needed the bulbs to see clearly. In my 4 years of staying in that dormitory, I experienced a few of these things myself. I would stand at the sink brushing my teeth and the faucet next to me would suddenly start running full blast, then slowly shut itself off, as if someone invisible had finished rinsing their mouth. At first we tried to laugh it off. Someone would say that maybe the pipes were just old or that the switch was loose. But after the 100th time it happened, and after hearing so many similar stories from other girls, it became harder to convince yourself that everything was just because of the age of the building. Still, what I remember most clearly are the incidents that happened to me personally in our room, when there was nobody else who could have caused them. One afternoon during my freshman year, after a long day of classes, I went back to my room feeling tired and sleepy. It was that kind of tiredness that sinks into your bones, where all you want is to lie down and close your eyes. At that time my roommates were out, either in class or somewhere else, and I had the room to myself. The dorm room was simple, a few beds, some cabinets, a small desk, and the bare white walls that we tried to make friendlier by taping pictures and notes on them. The windows looked out over the campus, and during the day you could hear the faint noise of people moving around outside, but that afternoon it was unusually quiet. The air felt heavy, and as I lay down on my bed, I could feel the silence pressing against my ears. I did not think of anything strange, I just closed my eyes and let myself drift toward sleep. After a while, I heard footsteps. They sounded clear and solid, like the sound of rubber slippers hitting the linoleum floor, and they were coming closer to where I was lying. I thought to myself that my roommates had come back, so I slowly opened my eyes, expecting to see one of them by the door or near her bed. But when my eyes adjusted to the light, there was no one there. The room was exactly as I had left it, the beds empty, the door closed, the air still. I told myself that maybe the sound had come from the hallway, and since I was half asleep, it had seemed louder than it really was. So I shook off the slight unease and lay back down again, pulling my blanket over my legs and closing my eyes. I was just starting to feel comfortable again when I heard the footsteps a second time. They were even clearer now, slow but heavy, as if someone was walking deliberately toward the area near my bed. The sound did not come from the hallway. It came from inside the room itself, from the floor just a few steps away from where I was lying. This time, the fear rose from my stomach to my chest in an instant. I felt my heart beat faster, and my breathing became shallow. At that moment, all the stories I had heard from other girls about footsteps in empty rooms and strange movements at night came flooding back to me. I suddenly felt very alone, and the thought of opening my eyes again scared me, because I was afraid of what I might see. But keeping them closed did not make me feel safer either, because I could still hear the footsteps moving. Panic took over and I did what my frightened mind could think of. I sat up abruptly, grabbed the broom that was standing in the corner, rushed to the door, and locked it. I sat back down on my bed, still holding the broom tightly with both hands, as if it were some kind of weapon that could protect me from whatever was walking around in the room. Part of me knew how ridiculous it was. Even in that moment I had the thought that if it was a ghost, it would not feel anything if I tried to hit it with a broom. But holding the broom gave me something to cling to, something solid, and in that small way it made me feel like I had control over the situation. I kept my eyes fixed on the door and the space around my bed, waiting for something to appear, but after a little while the footsteps stopped. The room went completely quiet again. I sat like that for several minutes, my hands sweating on the handle of the broom, expecting another sound. When nothing else happened, I slowly calmed down and eventually convinced myself to put the broom down and continue with my day, but that experience stayed with me. After that, no matter how tired I was, I never truly relaxed when I was alone in the room. The years passed, and as I moved from being a freshman to a senior, I learned to live with the dorm's strange personality. You'd get used to hearing stories from other girls. You learn which rooms have the heavier feeling, which corners of the hallway people avoid at night, which bathrooms some girls refuse to use when they are alone. By senior year, there were only 3 of us in our room. One of them was E, who liked to read on her bed, with her back against the wall and her book propped up on her knees. The other was B, whose bed was next to mine. We had already spent years together by then, so we felt comfortable enough to share all kinds of stories, even the scary ones. But the experience I had that year was different from just hearing rumors. It happened on an ordinary day, with no special occasion or strange weather to blame. I lay down on my bed to rest and did not realize I was about to slip into a very odd kind of sleep. In my dream, I was in our room, wearing the same clothes I had on in real life. The light coming in through the window looked exactly as it did before I closed my eyes, and the beds and cabinets were in their usual places. The only strange thing was that 2 of my classmates, who were not dormers and did not live there with us, were inside the room. They were standing near the windows, busy putting up curtains, chatting softly to each other as they worked. It felt wrong even in the dream, because I knew in reality they were not allowed inside the dormitory rooms since they were not residents. But in the dream I just watched them, feeling confused but unable to move or speak. Then suddenly I woke up, or at least I thought I did. I opened my eyes and saw the room again, the same beds, the same light, the same feeling of lying in my own space. I told myself that what I had seen was just a dream and I tried to shake it off. But as I looked around, I saw the same 2 classmates again, still inside the room, still putting curtains on the windows. This time, the curtains were a different color, and it struck me as even more strange. I realized then that I was not truly awake yet, that it was a dream inside a dream. That small realization made me feel trapped, like I was stuck between being awake and asleep and could not find my way back to reality. Then my alarm rang. The familiar sound broke through whatever layer of sleep I was trapped in, and this time, when I opened my eyes, I knew I was really awake. The room looked normal. The classmates were not there. E was on her bed reading, as usual, and B was sitting on hers, next to mine. I sat up, still feeling the leftover fear from the nightmare. I told B about what I had just experienced, about the double dream and the strange presence of the classmates, and the different color of the curtains. As I described it, I could see her expression change, from casual curiosity to real fear. When I finished talking, E suddenly ran towards us from her bed. Her face was pale and she looked genuinely scared. She told us that while she was quietly reading, her bed started to shake. At first she thought there was an earthquake, but when she glanced at the other beds around her, she saw that they were not moving at all. Only her bed was shaking, as if something was beneath it or holding it and trying to get her attention. The shaking then stopped as suddenly as it started. She told us this happened at almost the same time that I was having my strange layered nightmare. When we checked the approximate time, we realized that what she had felt on her bed and what I had experienced in my sleep happened at the same moment. That realization brought a different kind of fear. It was not just that something odd had happened, it was that 2 different odd things had happened at the same time, connected somehow, even though one was inside my mind and the other was a physical movement of her bed. For a while, we just sat there, looking at each other without knowing what to say. Then, without even needing to agree formally, we decided to pray. We gathered on one bed, held each other's hands, and recited prayers out loud, asking for protection and peace, asking that whatever had happened would not return. Saying the words together helped us calm down, but every time I remember that day, I still feel a small chill. Not all the strange events in that dormitory happened to me directly. Some happened to the people close to me, and I learned about them through their stories, which were so sincere and detailed that I had no reason to doubt them. One of my former roommates, A, shared an experience that still makes me uneasy when I think about it. She told us that one night, she was sleeping on her side, facing the wall. It was just an ordinary night for her, nothing unusual had happened during the day, and she fell asleep as usual. Sometime in the middle of the night, she felt a firm tap on her shoulder, not gentle but hard enough to wake her up. In that half-awake state, she thought it might be one of us trying to get her attention, maybe for something important. She opened her eyes, expecting to see a familiar face. Instead, she saw an old woman in white staring down at her. The woman's face was close, standing beside her bed, looking directly into her eyes. I described the woman's hair as gray, the skin wrinkled, and the expression deep and intense, not angry exactly, but not kind either. She was just staring. I felt the blood drain from her face and her body freeze. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I told us that in that moment she knew, without anyone needing to tell her, that this was not a living person. She tried to move, to sit up or turn away, but her body would not respond right away. Slowly, she forced herself to shut her eyes again and turn her face toward the wall, hoping that if she just pretended to be asleep, the old woman would go away. She stayed like that for a long time, her heart pounding, until finally exhaustion took over and she somehow managed to fall asleep again. Another friend of mine, F, had a similar but even more frightening experience. She said that one night she woke up for no clear reason. She felt like someone was watching her, so she opened her eyes. When she did, she saw not just one but two old people, a man and a woman, staring down at her from the side of her bed. They were both dressed in white, like old-fashioned night clothes or simple white garments, and they were leaning over her, looking at her face closely as if they were trying to recognize who she was. I've said that their faces were emotionless. Their eyes fixed, and for a moment she could not even breathe from the fear. She knew no one like that lived in the dorm. There were no grandparents or old visitors in that room. Every part of her body wanted to move, to get away from them, but she felt heavy and weak. Then, through the fear, she remembered something she had been taught as a child, that when you see something like that, you should call on God. So she started to recite the prayer. I believe in God. In her mind at first, then, as she found her voice, she whispered it out loud. As soon as she reached the words of the prayer, she said the two old figures slowly faded and then disappeared completely. The room became still again, and she was left shaking, but she felt lighter somehow, as if a heavy weight had been taken off her chest. When she told us that story, I could see that just remembering it made her uncomfortable. She kept rubbing her arms as if she were cold, even when the room was warm. Hearing her and us share their experiences, and then comparing them with my own, made me realize that in that dormitory, there were many more eyes watching us than we could see. Some nights, when the wind blew through the old windows and the floorboards creaked, it was easy to imagine all the things that had happened there since the building was first put up. The sick people during the war, the bodies on the white table in the kitchen, the students who had come and gone, and the spirits that maybe never left. Living in normal hell for 4 years taught me to respect things I cannot explain. It taught me that sometimes buildings remember, and that sometimes those memories reach out to the people who live there now. Even if I cannot fully understand why those things happened, the footsteps in my empty room, the dream and the shaking bed, the old woman in white, the two old people staring down at F, I know they were real to the ones who experienced them, and that alone is enough to make those long, dim hallways and cold-tiled bathrooms stay in my mind forever. I was 7 years old when my aunt died of ovarian cancer in Leganés, Iloilo. And even though I was still very young, I could already feel that her death was something heavy and unfair. She was only 30 years old then, so full of life, and she had just gotten married not long before she became sick. She left behind 3 small children, my cousins, who were all too young to understand why their mother suddenly stopped coming home from the hospital, why the grown-ups were all crying, and why there was a wooden box in the middle of the living room with flowers and candles around it. I remember the bus ride going to Iloilo, the smell of the sea air mixed with gasoline, my mother holding my hand tightly as if she was afraid I might run off somewhere. I did not completely understand what was happening, but I knew something was wrong because everyone kept talking in low voices, and whenever my aunt's name was mentioned, the mood in the room would suddenly change. When we arrived at my aunt's house, it felt strange at once. It was the same place I used to visit as a younger child, the same stairs, the same wooden floors, the same walls with family photos. But now everything looked different because of the coffin placed near the center of the sala. There were chairs arranged in rows, plates of food on the table for visitors, flowers with white ribbons, and candles that burned slowly, their wax dripping down like tears. People came and went, some stayed the whole night, others just stayed long enough to say a prayer and offer their condolences. As a child, my first honest reaction was curiosity. I kept stealing glances at the coffin when I thought the adults were not looking. My aunt's face was covered with makeup, and her hands were folded neatly on her chest. She looked like she was sleeping, but not in a way that felt peaceful to me. She looked like she was very far away. During the first night of her wake, everyone was busy, and I somehow enjoyed having a lot of cousins around. We played outside, ran around the yard, and tried to forget the sadness by chasing each other. But underneath all that, I could feel the tension in the house. The adults were tired and worried, and everyone seemed to be walking on eggshells. On the second night of her wake, things became more intense for me personally. That was the night everything happened, the night that stayed with me for years and years. It started with something that, for a child, felt normal and even small, a fight over a toy. My aunt's youngest son, my little cousin, and I were playing with some shared toys. I had always been a bit of a bully when I was younger, and that night my worst side came out. We were arguing over something very simple. I don't even remember exactly what it was now, maybe a small car or a plastic figure, something that wouldn't matter at all to grown-ups. But to us, it was the most important thing in the world at that moment. I grabbed a wooden stick from the floor, something that had probably fallen from a broom or a frame, and hit him on the thigh. It was not a hard blow meant to break his bones, but it was hard enough to leave a bruise and make him cry. He clutched his leg and wailed loudly, and the sound of his crying cut through the murmur of voices and the soft hum of prayers in the wake. My mother rushed over, her face a mix of anger and embarrassment. I remember seeing other relatives looking in our direction, shaking their heads, and I knew I was in big trouble. My mom scolded me harshly, asking me why I did that, why I was behaving like that, especially at such a time when everyone was already in pain. I did not have a good answer. I was just stubborn and selfish in that moment. As punishment, my mother decided she had enough of my misbehavior. She grabbed me by the arm and dragged me upstairs to one of the rooms on the second floor of my aunt's house. The room she chose was old and almost empty. There was only one bed, one wooden window, and some old furniture pushed to the corners. The light in the room was either very dim or turned off, because I remember it as very dark except for some faint light coming from the window. The air felt thick and dusty, and the silence in that room was very different from the noise downstairs where people were praying and talking. My mother, still angry and wanting to teach me a lesson, padlocked the door from the outside after pushing me in. I remember hearing the click of the lock, that small but very clear sound that told me I could not get out on my own. At first I was furious because I thought it was unfair. I pounded on the door, shouting and crying, telling them to let me out, promising that I would behave, promising I would not hit my cousin again. But no one came. My voice did not seem to reach anyone. The room was far from the stairs, and most people were downstairs or outside the house talking with other relatives or visitors. After a while, my anger turned to fear. The darkness inside the room felt like it was pressing against my skin. I started to imagine things hiding in the corners, shapes in the shadows. The only thing in the room that gave some comfort was the bed, so after my voice became hoarse from crying and my fists hurt from banging on the door, I climbed onto the bed and curled up there. My eyes were still wet with tears, and somehow, with all the emotional exhaustion, I eventually fell asleep. I do not know how long I slept, but sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke up abruptly. The first thing I felt was a strong sting in my thigh, like someone had slapped me or spanked me very hard on the exact spot where I had hit my cousin earlier. The pain was sudden and sharp. It shocked me so much that I sat up right away, my heart pounding. The room was still dark, and for a moment I thought someone had come in while I was sleeping, maybe my mother, maybe another relative wanting to scold me again. I looked around, my eyes straining to see shapes in the dim light, but there was nobody there. The door was still shut, and when I ran to it and tried to open it, it did not budge. I shook the handle, pushed with my shoulder, but it was still locked from the outside. I remember calling out, shouting, "Mama!" and crying again. I felt a mixture of pain, confusion, and fear. I started to wonder if someone had really slapped me or if it was just a dream that felt too real. After getting no response from outside and realizing I was still very much alone, I went back to the bed, too scared to stand in the middle of the dark room. I pulled the blanket over myself, tucking it tightly around my body like a shield. I tried to make myself as small as possible, hoping that if anything else was inside the room, it would not notice me. At some point, despite my fear, I fell asleep again, probably from pure exhaustion. But peace did not last long. Around 5 in the morning, just before dawn, I was woken up again by another blow to my thigh. This time it felt less like a slap and more like a strong whip, as if something invisible had struck me in anger. I cried out in pain and shock, and instinctively my hand flew to the spot on my leg that hurt. I could feel the skin throbbing under my fingers. I sat up quickly, my heart hammering in my chest, and that was when I noticed that the door of the room was no longer closed. It was standing slightly open, just enough for a narrow line of light from the hallway to seep in. Considering that only a few hours earlier it had been securely padlocked from the outside, it did not make sense to my 7-year-old mind how it could now be open. I did not pause to think about it too much, though. Fear and the desire to get out of that room took over. I jumped off the bed and ran out of the room as fast as my little legs could carry me. As I went down the stairs, the wooden steps creaked beneath my feet, and the air was much colder than I expected. The sky outside was still dark blue, the kind of color it takes just before sunrise. There were no voices, no murmurs of conversation, no clinking of cups or spoons. When I reached the landing where I could see the living room, I slowed down. My aunt's casket was still there in the middle of the room, surrounded by flowers and candles. But what scared me more than anything was the fact that no one else was there. In Filipino wakes, there is usually always someone watching over the coffin, praying, or at least staying awake so the deceased is never left alone. But at that moment, there were no relatives sitting on the plastic chairs, no neighbors holding rosaries, no one asleep on the benches. The entire house felt empty even though I knew it was full of people an hour or two before. The candles still burned, but the flames were smaller, like they were getting tired. The room felt cold, not just in temperature but in atmosphere, like the warmth of living people had been removed. I started to walk slowly past my aunt's coffin, planning to go straight out of the house and look for my mother. As I moved, I noticed a sound that did not belong to the silence. It was very soft at first, almost drowned out by the faint buzzing of a nearby electric fan and the distant sound of roosters starting to crow outside. It was like a hum, a gentle melody being sung with closed lips. I stopped walking and stood still, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. The humming grew a little clearer, and I recognized the rhythm as something similar to a lullaby, the kind of tune a mother would hum when rocking her baby to sleep. It was a soothing sound in itself, but in that empty living room, with the coffin right beside me, it became something else entirely. My body began to shiver as realization slowly crept in. The sound was not coming from the kitchen, Not from the yard, not from any of the rooms. It seemed to be coming from the coffin. More exactly, from inside the coffin. My breath caught in my throat. I felt all the tiny hairs on my arms and at the back of my neck stand on end. The soft humming continued, calm and steady, like someone lovingly comforting a child. A part of me wanted to run immediately, but another part was frozen with a kind of horrified curiosity. I did not dare lean closer or look too long at my aunt's face, but I knew what my ears were hearing. The sound was real to me. Every second that passed felt like an hour. Finally, my fear overcame everything else, and I turned and ran out of the house as fast as I could. The moment my feet hit the ground outside and the early morning air touched my face, I felt a tiny bit safer because I could see the sky, the street, and the shapes of people moving. My legs were shaking, but I kept going until I reached the area where my mother and other relatives were already awake and preparing food for the visitors who would be coming back later in the day. Pots were being set up over portable stoves, rice was being washed, and coffee was being stirred in big kettles. I rushed to my mother, tears in my eyes, my words stumbling over one another as I tried to tell her everything that happened: the slaps on my thigh, the door that opened by itself, the empty living room, and the humming from my aunt's coffin. My voice was shaky, and I remember desperately wanting her to hug me and tell me she believed me. Instead, she and some of my relatives gave me the kind of look adults give children when they think they are just imagining things. They listened, but I could see doubt in their eyes. My mother even frowned slightly and asked me how I got out of the locked room when she remembered clearly padlocking it from the outside and keeping the key with her. That made my story sound even more unbelievable to them. They tried to explain it away. Someone must have opened the door earlier, they said. Maybe I had a bad dream and woke up thinking it was real. Maybe the humming was just the wind or a neighbor's radio far away. But I knew what I had felt and heard. Even if I was only 7, some experiences sink into your memory in a way that no one's doubt can erase. And that night, combined with my guilt for hurting my cousin, etched itself very deeply into my mind. After my aunt's burial, life seemed to go back to normal on the outside. The flowers wilted and were thrown away, the chairs were returned to their owners, the coffin was no longer in the living room, and her children and husband began the difficult task of adjusting to life without her. We returned to Manila and went back to our usual routines. School started again, chores resumed, and slowly the house in Iloilo became a memory we visited only in stories or during family gatherings. Still, the image of that dark room, the stinging on my thigh, and the humming near the coffin would replay in my mind at night when everything was quiet. Some nights, I would pull my blanket over my head and squeeze my eyes shut just to push the thoughts away. For a while, nothing strange happened to me in Manila. Then, one night, something happened that made me believe my aunt might not have really left us, or at least not completely. I was in my room getting ready to sleep. It was late, and the house was already quiet. I had a small closet in my room where I kept my clothes and some of my toys. That night, for some reason, my eyes were drawn to that closet. I was lying in bed and just staring in that direction, not really thinking of anything in particular, when suddenly I saw a figure leaning against it. It was the shape of a woman, her body slightly tilted, as if resting casually on the closet. I could not see her face clearly because it seemed to blend into the darkness, but I could see her dress very clearly. She was wearing the exact same dress my aunt had been wearing in her coffin during the wake in Iloilo. It was the same color, the same style, and it hung on her body in the same way. The sight of that familiar dress in my dim bedroom made my blood run cold. For a second, I could not move. I just stared, trying to focus my eyes and hoping that maybe it was just a trick of the shadows or some clothes hanging in a strange way. But in my heart, I felt that it was her. It did not last long. In the blink of an eye, the figure was gone, as if someone had switched off a projector. One moment she was there, the next moment there was only the plain outline of my closet in the dark. My chest felt tight, and I could hear my own heartbeat loudly in my ears. Without thinking twice, I jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room. My feet almost slipped on the floor as I hurried through the hallway. When I got there, I asked if I could sleep with them, and my mother, probably thinking I was just scared or had a bad dream, allowed me to sleep on the couch inside their room. The couch was placed about 4 meters away from my parents' bed, close enough that I could see them clearly when the night light was on. I lay down, still shaken, and pulled a blanket over myself. Eventually, with them nearby, I felt safe enough to close my eyes. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke up again. At first I did not know what woke me. The room was still dark except for the soft glow of the night light. My parents were both on their bed, lying side by side under their blanket. Then I heard a sound that made my heart freeze. It was the sound of someone crying quietly. I looked at the bed and saw a figure sitting at the edge of it. The person's shoulders were shaking slightly, and their hands were covering their face, as if they were trying to hide their tears. The crying was not loud, but it was full of sadness, the kind that comes from deep inside. In the dim light, the figure looked like my mother. The hair length, the way she sat, the shape of her body, it all looked like her. I felt worried, so I sat up on the couch and asked softly, "Mom, what's wrong?" She did not answer. I tried again, this time a bit louder. "Mom, why are you crying?" Still, the figure did not respond. The crying continued, the hands did not move away from the face. I started to feel uneasy. Something about the silence, about the lack of reaction, made the hair on my arms stand up. So I called out a third time, louder and more urgent. "Mom!" At that exact moment, my eyes shifted slightly, and I saw something that made my stomach drop. My real mother was lying on the bed behind the crying figure, fast asleep beside my father. Both of them were under the blanket, their faces relaxed, clearly not awake or sitting up. That was when I realized that the one sitting at the edge of the bed, the one crying with hands covering her face, was not my mother at all. As soon as that realization hit me, fear flooded my body. I started shouting, not even forming proper sentences, just trying to make as much noise as possible to wake my parents. I called out to them again and again, my voice shaking. In an instant, the crying figure was gone, disappearing as suddenly as the woman by my closet. One moment she was there, the next moment the edge of the bed was empty. My parents woke up with a jolt, confused and worried by my shouting. They turned on the lights and hurried to where I was, checking if I had a fever, touching my forehead, and asking me what was wrong. I was still trembling, trying to explain what I saw. They listened, but I could see in their faces that they were unsure whether to believe me or to chalk it up to nightmares or an overactive imagination. They checked the room, the hallway, even my bedroom, just in case someone had somehow gotten inside the house, but of course they found nothing. The next day, when things were calmer, I told them the story again, this time more slowly, trying to be clear about every detail. The woman by the closet wearing my aunt's dress, the crying lady at the edge of their bed, the way she looked like my mother at first until I saw my real mom still asleep. As expected, they still did not fully believe me, or at least they did not show that they did. They were more concerned that I might be getting sick or that I was too affected by my aunt's death, so they kept checking my temperature and telling me not to think too much about it. But for me, those two sets of experiences, what happened in Iloilo during my aunt's wake and what happened later in Manila, felt connected. I could not shake the feeling that my aunt was somehow still around, watching us, maybe trying to say something or express something, especially to me. Maybe she was angry because I hurt her youngest son at her wake. Maybe she wanted to remind me to be kinder or to protect her children. Maybe she was just sad and could not let go yet. I do not know for sure. All I know is that at 7 years old, those encounters were too real and too detailed for me to dismiss. Even now, when I look back, I can still feel the sting on my thigh, hear the soft humming near the coffin, see the outline of a woman in a familiar dress leaning on my closet, and remember the sound of quiet crying at 3 in the morning while my real parents slept peacefully behind a figure that vanished the moment I called for help. It all started when I was about 9 or 10 years old, at an age when Christmas still felt like magic, and I believed that as long as I was surrounded by my family, nothing truly bad could happen to me. Every year we spent Christmas at different relatives' houses, and each gathering felt like a big reunion where everyone brought food, laughter, and stories. That particular year, the celebration was at one of my relatives' houses inside a compound where several members of the family lived close to each other. The adults were all busy preparing for Noche Buena, talking loudly, drinking, laughing, and arranging food on long tables, while Christmas lights blinked in different colors around the front of the house and Christmas songs played from a radio somewhere. The smell of food, like roasted meat, spaghetti, and various Filipino dishes, mixed with the cool December air. The older relatives sat on plastic chairs, catching up on news about work, children, and life, while some of the titas were busy in the kitchen, tasting dishes, checking the oven, and shouting instructions over the noise. Meanwhile, my cousins and I, full of energy and excitement, decided we were tired of just sitting around and wanted to play. We chose the classic game we always played at gatherings, hide and seek. It was our favorite because the compound had many good hiding places. Behind parked cars, behind water drums, under tables, behind doors, in dark corners near the backyard, and even on the stairs. The compound itself was a bit large if you were a child. There was a main house with a big front area where the adults were partying, and then there were side and back areas where the lights were fewer and the shadows longer. We agreed on the rules, chose who would be it, and then scattered in different directions, shrieking and laughing as we ran. I was very scared of becoming the it, because I hated being the one to count and then chase everyone, so as soon as the person who was it closed their eyes and started counting loudly, I ran as fast as my legs could carry me. I did not even look carefully where I was going. I just wanted to go as far as possible so no one would find me easily. My feet carried me past the front yard, away from the bright lights and cheerful noise, and into the darker, quieter part at the back of the compound. I was panting for breath, my chest rising and falling quickly, my heart beating fast from both the running and the excitement. The ground at the back was less even, with patches of dirt, grass, and some stones. As I slowed down, looking around for the best place to hide, I was only thinking of how to win the game, and not be caught. I remember glancing over my shoulder once to make sure that a person was nowhere near me and feeling satisfied when I saw no one behind me. Then, just as I took another step forward, my foot landed on something slippery. It might have been wet moss, mud, or even some plastic on the ground, I never really knew, but my foot slid out from under me so quickly that I had no time to balance myself. I fell hard on the ground, my body slumping down with a dull thud. Pain shot through my leg and side, and the shock of the fall made my eyes water. For a second I just lay there, stunned, feeling the roughness of the dirt and small stones against my skin, feeling the ache spreading from where I hit the ground. My clothes got dirty, and I could smell the soil and dampness of the earth. My chest tightened, and I felt embarrassed and scared at the same time. The backyard area was much quieter than the front, and the laughter and music from the party sounded faint and far away, like they were coming from another world. I felt very alone. Almost instinctively, with my voice shaking and my eyes filling with tears, I called out for my mom. I remember saying, "Ma!" in a scared and almost crying voice, hoping somehow she would come. But even as I called her name, a part of me knew deep down that it was almost impossible for her or any other family member to hear me clearly from where I was. The adults were all in front of the house, laughing and talking over loud music and clinking utensils, and I was all the way at the back, where no one really paid attention to what was happening. The compound was not huge like a field, but for a child, the distance and the walls and corners between us felt like a big barrier. I sat there for a few moments, trying to fight back the tears, massaging the part of my body that hurt. The night air pressed around me, cooler and heavier than in front, and there were fewer lights, so the shadows seemed thicker. After a while, when I realized that no one was coming and I was still alone, I decided that instead of waiting there and risking being found by it, or just staying in the dark and feeling more and more scared, I would go back inside the house. I thought that once I got inside, I could wash up or at least be closer to my family. So I slowly stood up, legs still a little shaky from the fall, brushed some dirt from my clothes, and began to walk back, passing through a narrow part of the compound that led toward the back entrance of the house. As I walked along that path, I felt a little calmer, thinking that soon I would be in a brighter place. But then something caught my eye. At first, I saw only movement from the corner of my eye, like something white swaying or floating nearby. I turned my head and noticed what looked like 3 white shapes hanging in the air. They were not solid like people standing there. They looked like white clothes or dresses floating in the air, like transparent images that did not touch the ground. They were positioned ahead of me, not too close but not very far either, just enough for me to see their outlines clearly. My first instinct was to tell myself that I was just imagining it. Maybe it was laundry on a clothesline moving with the breeze, or maybe my eyes were tired from running and crying. I stood still for a second, staring at them, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was just light reflecting on something. Maybe some white curtains or tarpaulins were hanging somewhere. I wanted to believe it was nothing unusual because believing otherwise would mean accepting that something beyond normal was happening. But the more I stared, the less they looked like ordinary objects. The air around me suddenly felt different. Goosebumps ran up my arms and down my back, and the hair on my neck stood up. I felt that strange, heavy, eerie pressure that comes when you know you are not alone even though no one visible is near you. A cold wind brushed past me, not strong enough to make anything flutter, but just enough to make me shiver. I could feel the temperature around me drop in a way that did not match the rest of the night. In that moment, it hit me with a cold clarity that what I was seeing was real, at least real to my eyes and senses, and not just my imagination playing games with me. I looked more carefully, and slowly, the 3 white shapes took on clearer forms. They were no longer just floating pieces of cloth. They became the figures of 3 ladies in white, their dresses long and pale, almost glowing softly against the dark background of the backyard. Their bodies seemed to float instead of stand, as if they were hanging in the air, their feet not touching the ground. I could see their long black hair flowing down, reaching past their shoulders, heavy and dark against the lightness of their dresses. The strangest and most frightening part was that I could not see their faces. Where their faces should have been, there was either a blur or a blankness, like the details were taken away. It was as if someone had drawn a person but erased the center of the face, leaving only the outline of their heads and hair. They were just there, hovering quietly, their white clothes shifting ever so slightly as if a gentle wind was moving around them, even though nothing else around us was moving. The 3 figures raised their hands and slowly waved, not like a cheerful greeting but more like a silent calling. Their hands moved in a way that seemed to invite me, pulling my attention toward them. It felt like they were signaling me to come closer to them. My whole body froze. I was completely stunned. My legs, which had just carried me out of the backyard, refused to move. My feet felt as if they had grown roots and were glued to the ground. My arms hung stiff at my sides. My mind was a mix of disbelief and terror, and my heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tried to move backward, even just 1 step, but my muscles would not obey. It was as if something invisible had wrapped itself around me, holding me in place. Fear crawled up my spine and wrapped itself around my chest. I wanted to scream for my mother again, to shout her name at the top of my lungs, but when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. My lips formed her name, but air did not move properly through my throat. It felt like my voice had been stolen, like someone had pressed a hand over my mouth even though nothing was there. I could feel tears welling in my eyes, not just from the earlier fall but from pure fright. I kept trying, again and again, to call out, but it was the same result: silence. It was as if all the energy in my body was being drained away, pulled out of me by some invisible force. My knees felt weak, my hands were cold, and I could feel my body trembling. I felt trapped between wanting to run and not being able to even turn around. The 3 ladies continued to float before me, their long black hair hanging down, their faceless heads all turned in my direction. I could feel their attention, even if they had no visible eyes. They raised their hands again, slowly, steadily, and I could sense that they were still calling me, even if I did not hear words at first. In that terrifying moment, when it felt like I had no control over my own body, something inside me pushed back. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was something my family had taught me, maybe it was pure desperation, but I started to pray. I looked at them as fiercely as I could, forcing myself not to look away, and in my heart I told myself that I would not go to them, that I belonged with the living, with my family, and not with whatever they were. Even though my hands were shaking and my legs felt weak, I began to pray really hard. The words of the prayers I had learned since childhood came to my mind. I silently started saying them, sentence after sentence, trying to focus on each word. It was difficult because fear was making it hard to breathe. In between the lines of my prayer, I could hear my own gasps, short and sharp, as I tried not to sob out loud. As I prayed, the atmosphere around us felt even heavier for a moment, like something did not like what I was doing. In the middle of my prayers, I started to hear something else, something that made my skin crawl. The three figures were no longer just silently waving. I could hear them. I did not hear them the way I hear people talk every day. The sounds seemed to come from everywhere at once, and yet also from inside my head, like whispers and echoes blended together. I could hear them saying my name. They were calling me, softly but clearly enough that I recognized it. Hearing them say my name, knowing that whatever they were, they knew who I was, shook me deeply. It made the situation feel even more personal and frightening. I was shaking so badly I thought my knees would buckle, and I was close to losing control, close to hysteria. My body wanted to give in to the fear, to cry, to collapse, to stop fighting. But somewhere inside me, I felt that if I stopped praying, if I let go, something worse might happen. So I forced myself to continue praying, my words becoming faster and more urgent in my mind, begging for protection, asking God and any guardian angel watching over me to help me, to keep these things away from me. I kept my eyes open as long as I could, watching as the three figures slowly began to change. Little by little, almost as if someone was slowly turning down the brightness of a picture, the ladies in white began to fade. Their outlines became less sharp, their forms less solid. Their hands lowered slowly, the movement becoming weaker. Their long black hair became less defined against the background, like ink being washed away from a page. I kept praying, refusing to look away, and I watched as they gradually disappeared into the air. Their pale shapes became thinner and lighter until finally there was nothing there but the dark, empty space of the backyard path once again. It felt like a long time had passed, but in reality, it might have only been a few minutes. The coldness around me lifted slightly, though my body still felt icy from fear. As soon as I realized that the figures were gone, that I could no longer see them, something inside me broke free, like a grip had been released. Suddenly, I could move again. Without thinking, without even looking back a second time, I turned and ran as fast as I could toward the house. My legs moved quickly, almost on their own, my heart racing, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I did not care if I stumbled or if anyone saw me. I just wanted to reach the safety of the house, the bright lights, and the noise of my family. As I ran, my vision seemed to blur, like the world around me was spinning or stretching. I felt dizzy, like I was floating instead of running. The last thing I remember clearly is the sound of my own footsteps, and the feeling of my heart pounding too hard. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer outside. I was lying down in my cousin's room inside the house. The lights were on, and the room felt warm and familiar. My body felt heavy at first, like I had been asleep for a long time. As my vision cleared, I saw my cousins, my relatives, and my mother all gathered around me. They were staring at me with worried expressions, their faces close to mine, their voices talking all at once, asking if I was okay. I felt confused and overwhelmed. The memory of the three floating ladies, the cold wind, the sound of them calling my name, and my desperate prayers all came rushing back into my mind. My chest tightened and tears started to fall down my cheeks. I burst into tears and began to cry again, sobbing as I told my mother what I had seen, how I had fallen in the backyard, how I had seen three white figures with long black hair and no faces floating and waving at me as if they wanted me to come to them. How I had tried to call her name but could not speak, how I had prayed as hard as I could until they disappeared, and how I had run back before everything went dark. I told her every detail I could remember, my words tumbling over each other as I tried to explain the fear I had felt. My mother listened, holding me close, trying to calm me as I clung to her. When I finally finished talking and my sobs had softened into quiet crying, she looked at me seriously. She did not laugh at me or dismiss what I said as simple imagination. She told me that I might have inherited the third eye that she and my Lolo had. She said that in her younger years, she and my grandfather had also seen things that other people could not see, that they sometimes sensed spirits or creatures around them. Hearing that from her made something click in my mind. It was both frightening and strangely comforting. On one hand, it scared me to think that I might be like them, that I might see things that others could not. On the other hand, it meant that she understood and did not think I was just making it all up. From that time on, things changed for me. That encounter in the backyard was only the beginning. I started to see more things that other people did not seem to notice. Sometimes I would see shadows moving where there should be none, or figures standing in corners of rooms, or shapes passing by in reflections that disappeared when I turned around. I would feel sudden cold spots in warm places, hear faint whispering or soft footsteps when the house was supposed to be empty. I often saw creatures and ghosts, some clearer than others, some just vague shapes that gave off a strong feeling of sadness or anger. Every time I saw them, my first reaction was always the same. I was scared like hell. My heart would pound, my hands would tremble, and I would feel the urge to run or hide. At night, I sometimes slept with the light on or with someone else in the room just so I would not feel alone. For a long time, I wished that I did not have this ability, that I could just be like everyone else who walked around without seeing these things. I envied people who could go into dark places and feel nothing but normal fear of the unknown, not this heavy sense of awareness that I had. But as time passed and I grew older, my understanding slowly changed. I realized that no matter how much I tried to deny it, this was a part of me I could not easily erase. The more I heard stories from my mother and my Lolo about their own experiences, the more I began to see that what I had was not just a curse. Yes, it was frightening and difficult, and yes, it still scared me deeply many times, but it was also something that connected me to things beyond the ordinary. It was a kind of gift, a strange one, but still a gift. I came to understand that some people believe that those with a third eye could sometimes help restless spirits, or at least pray for them more clearly. I started to accept, slowly and carefully, that I might have to live my life with this ability. I still get scared whenever I see something, and I still feel that cold fear run through me at times, but I also remind myself that I am not completely helpless. I have my faith, my prayers, and the knowledge that I am not the first in my family to experience these things. Little by little, it sank into me that this is something I should get used to, something I should learn to live with instead of running from forever. When my mother was young, she lived in a small rural area where almost everything was green. There were tall trees, thick grass, and the sounds of birds and insects filled the air every day. The house where they lived was old and made mostly of wood. The floors creaked when you walked, and the walls seemed to remember many years of stories and secrets. It was not a fancy house, but it was always full of people, laughter, and noise. Relatives came and went, children played inside and outside, and there was hardly ever a quiet moment. My mother grew up in that house, and because of that, she knew every corner, every stair, every door, and every shadow. She told me that even when she was a child, she sometimes felt strange in that house. Some nights she would feel uneasy for no clear reason. It was as if someone was watching from the dark places, even when no one was there. At the time, she thought it was just a child's imagination, but as she grew older and strange things started to happen, she began to wonder if that feeling meant something more. Living with my mother there was her cousin, my aunt, who later became one of the main people in this story. My aunt and my mother were almost like sisters. They grew up together, played together, and did everything side by side. My aunt was a very cheerful person. My mother always described her as happy, energetic, and beautiful. She was the type of person who smiled easily and laughed loudly. People liked her right away. She would talk to anyone, make friends quickly, and was kind to everyone she met. My mother said that if there was a group of people, you could be sure that my aunt would be in the center of it, joking, telling stories, or listening and nodding with interest. There was something bright about her, like she carried a small light inside her that drew people in. That is also why, maybe, what happened later felt even more shocking. It was hard to see someone so alive and friendly suddenly change into someone unrecognizable. One night, when my mother was still young, something strange happened that changed how she looked at the world forever. It was late, deep into the night, and the house, which was usually full of noise, was quiet for the first time she could remember. Most of the family had gone away to another place for some reason, so there were fewer people at home. My mother woke up suddenly because she needed to go to the bathroom. Normally, waking up at night did not bother her. She was used to hearing people talking in other rooms or walking up and down the stairs. But that night, it was different. She woke up and noticed how silent everything was. No voices, no footsteps, no pots clanging in the kitchen, not even the soft murmur of the radio. Just silence and the faint sound of crickets outside. It made her feel small and alone in that old house. Still, she needed to go, so she got up and quietly walked out of her room. The hallway was dim. Light from the moon came through some small openings, but most of the stairway was dark. She climbed the stairs slowly, feeling each old wooden step move under her bare feet. The bathroom was upstairs, so she made her way toward it. She was halfway up when she noticed that the door of the bathroom was slightly open, and there was a bit of light inside. As she reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the hallway, she could see someone sitting in the bathroom. It was my aunt. My mother saw her clearly. She was sitting on the toilet seat, but she was not doing anything normal. Her hand was holding a knife, and with slow, steady movements she was carving the sink in a circular motion, over and over, pressing the metal into the surface as if tracing some invisible pattern. My mother told me that in that moment, every hair on her body stood up. Something about the way my aunt moved was wrong. It was slow but strong, like she was focused on something very deep. Her head was slightly bent, and her eyes were not looking around, just staring at what her hand was doing. The sound of the knife scraping the surface of the sink made a faint, sharp noise. My mother tried to speak, but at first, nothing came out because of fear. Finally she managed to whisper my aunt's name, hoping that her cousin would look up, smile, and say something normal, like, "Oh, you scared me," or, "What are you doing awake?" But what happened was not like that at all. My aunt slowly lifted her head and looked at my mother. Her face looked tired, like she had not slept for days. Her eyes seemed different, not bright and lively like before. It was as if someone else was looking out from inside her. Then she spoke, and this was the part that truly terrified my mother. Her voice did not sound like her own. My aunt's usual voice was soft and warm, like a young woman's voice. But the sound that came out of her mouth that night was rough, deep, and hoarse, like an old man who had smoked for many years or like someone who had gravel in their throat. It was even worse because the tone felt cold and tired, and there was no emotion in it. She said just one thing. "I'm very tired." My mother said that when she heard those words, the fear she felt went from normal fear to something much deeper. It did not sound like a simple, "I'm tired," from a person who wanted to sleep. It sounded like something else was speaking through my aunt, something dark and ancient. There was a weight in those words, like all the energy had been drained from her body and something heavy was sitting on her soul. At that moment, my mother's mind screamed at her to run. She did not wait to think or argue with herself. She turned around and ran down the stairs as fast as she could, her small feet thudding on the steps, her heart pounding so loudly that she could hear it in her ears. Outside, it was dark, and the air felt damp and cold. But my mother did not stop. She ran out of the house, through the yard, and into the forested area nearby. She knew that the nearest neighbor's house was a few blocks away, if you could even call them blocks, because it was really just paths through trees and bushes. She pushed branches out of the way, scratched her arms and legs against twigs and leaves, but she kept going. She was shouting, calling for help, calling the names of the adults, anyone who could hear her. She did not care if animals or anything else might be in the dark. At that moment, she was more afraid of what was inside the bathroom in her own home than anything outside in the night. After what felt like a long time, she reached another house. She banged on the door, shouting and crying. The people inside woke up, confused and alarmed. When they saw it was her, shaking and sobbing, they hurried to let her in and hear what she had to say. Between tears and gasps, my mother tried to explain what she had seen: her cousin sitting on the toilet, carving the sink with a knife, speaking in a man's voice, saying she was very tired. The adults listened with serious faces. Some of them were skeptical at first, but there was something in the way my mother told the story that made them worry. She was not lying. She was too frightened, and her fear felt real. They knew something had to be wrong. A group of men quickly gathered themselves, grabbed flashlights and whatever they thought they might need, and made their way back through the dark path toward my mother's house. My mother stayed behind with the women and children, shaking and trying to catch her breath. She could hear some of the men talking in low voices as they left, saying things about spirits, bad signs, and how these things sometimes happened in old places. Some of them tried to brush it off as a person having a mental breakdown or just acting strange, but others seemed to feel something more. My mother told me she did not see everything that happened next inside the house. She only knows what she heard, and what people told her afterward. As the men went upstairs to where my aunt was, there was noise coming from the house. There were heavy footsteps, banging, sounds of furniture being pushed or knocked over, and raised voices. There were shouts, some angry, some panicked, and then low, deep sounds like grunts and growls that did not seem human. My mother heard some of these sounds and said it made her feel sick, like something unclean was being shaken loose. Time felt very long, but finally the noise lessened, and the men came back down, breathing hard and looking shaken. They did not say much at that moment, but she could tell from their pale faces and tense expressions that whatever happened upstairs was not simple. Later, my aunt was taken to a man known as a spiritual healer. This man was not a doctor in the usual sense, but in their community, he was the one who people went to when they felt they were being bothered by spirits, or when something invisible was harming their family. He was older, quiet, and serious. He listened to the story, watched my aunt carefully, and then he said that she was not just sick in the normal way. He said that she was possessed by a traveling lone dwarf, a kind of wandering spirit that moves from place to place, looking for people to attach itself to. In many local beliefs, there are small spirits like dwarfs or tiny people who can be helpful, neutral, or dangerous, depending on how they are treated or what they feel. This particular one, he said, was not friendly. It had chosen my aunt because she was always happy, always alive, beautiful, and full of energy. The spirit was attracted to that brightness and wanted to use her like a host to live through her. For my mother, hearing that was strange and frightening. She had grown up hearing stories about Duend, little people, and other spirits in trees and old places. But this was the first time someone she loved was being talked about in that way, as if she was a house being lived in by something else. The healer explained that to drive the spirit away, the family and the entire village had to work together. They needed to show respect to the spirit but also make it clear that it could not stay. He said they had to prepare a feast, a big one, with plenty of food and offerings. It would be done at night, and everyone had to be present and participate. The family agreed, because at that point they were desperate. They just wanted my aunt back, safe and normal. They did not care how strange the ritual sounded. So they began to prepare. Word spread through the village about what had happened, and people came together to help. Some brought rice, some brought meat and vegetables, others helped cook and arrange everything. Even people who did not fully believe in such things came because in small communities, everyone helps when there is trouble. As the sun went down, the air grew heavy. My mother said that night felt different from any other. The sky seemed darker, the wind quieter, as if the world was holding its breath. The house where my mother lived was now the center of attention. Inside, my aunt was kept safe, watched over by some family members and the healer. Outside, in front of the house, people gathered. They brought chairs and sat close together, or they stood in small groups, talking in low voices. My mother remembered that everyone felt nervous. Even the bravest men looked uneasy. The feast was laid out, plates of food, fruits, rice, drinks, and other offerings. The healer told everyone that the food was not just for them. It was also meant as an offering to the spirit, a way of saying, "We acknowledge you, but you must move on." When it was time, the healer stood up and began to speak. He spoke in a loud, clear voice, addressing the spirit, telling it that it had to leave my aunt's body, that it had taken enough, and that it had caused enough pain. He called it by the name of what it was, a traveling dwarf, and told it that it was not welcome in that house anymore. As he spoke, something strange started to happen. The lights around them, both inside the house and outside, began to flicker. At first, people thought it might be a simple electrical problem, but then they noticed that the flickering seemed to match the rhythm of the healer's words. The light would go on and off at certain points in his speech, as if something was reacting to what he was saying. Then, from inside the house, loud sounds began. Plates clashed. Furniture scraped across the floor. There were loud bangs, like doors being slammed or objects thrown. Some people said they heard low growls, as if an animal was angry. Others heard what sounded like a person shouting, but the words were unclear. My mother said that in that moment, everyone outside the house felt a mixture of fear and fascination. Some wanted to run away, but they stayed because they felt they had to see it through, for my aunt's sake. The sounds inside grew stronger for a while, like a storm raging in a closed room. The lights kept flickering, casting strange shadows on people's faces. Some of the villagers closed their eyes and prayed quietly, clutching rosaries or putting their hands together. My mother remembered holding on to someone's arm so tightly that her fingers hurt later, but she did not let go. She kept thinking, "Please let her be okay. Please let it leave her." She also felt a strange sadness for whatever was inside her aunt, even though it had caused fear. The idea of a lonely, wandering spirit made her feel that maybe it was lost and angry and did not know where to go. After some time, the noise inside the house slowly began to lessen. The smashing and banging stopped. The growls faded away. The lights steadied and stopped flickering. The air felt clearer, as if some heavy weight had been lifted. The healer continued speaking, but now his tone sounded more gentle, as if he was finishing a conversation. Then he signaled for some of the family to check on my aunt. They went inside, nervous but hopeful, and after a while they came back out and said that she was calm, breathing normally, and seemed to be herself again. In the days that followed, my aunt slowly returned to who she had been before. She went back to smiling, laughing, and talking like a normal person. She did not seem to remember everything that had happened during the worst parts, or maybe she remembered only pieces, like a bad dream. My mother said she never looked at her cousin the same way again, not in a bad sense, but with deeper respect and protectiveness. She knew that her cousin had gone through something terrible, something that was beyond normal understanding. As time passed, life in the village went back to its usual rhythm. People returned to their work in the fields, their daily routines, and their family duties. But the memory of that night remained. The story of the possession, the traveling dwarf, the feast, and the crashing sounds inside the house became something people talked about quietly, especially in the evenings, when the wind was soft and the stars were visible above the trees. Some believed completely that a spirit had possessed my aunt and had been driven away by the ritual. Others tried to explain it as some kind of illness or mental crisis combined with strong belief and fear. But for my mother, it was more personal. She had seen her aunt's face, heard that raspy voice say, "I'm very tired," and felt that heavy fear in her bones. She did not need anyone to tell her what to believe. She knew that something real had happened, even if she could not fully name it. When my mother later told this story to me, she did it in a calm, steady voice, but I could see the emotion in her eyes. She did not add anything extra to make it more dramatic. She did not try to scare me. She just told it the way she remembered it, clearly and simply. She never lies about these things, and I could feel that everything she said came straight from her memory. It haunts me whenever I think about it, not just because of the fear, but because it shows how thin the line can be between the world we see every day and the world we do not see. It makes me think about how some people, like my aunt, can be bright and joyful and still be touched by something strange and unexplained. Even now, when I remember the part where the lights flickered and the plates crashed inside the house while the whole village waited outside, holding their breath, I feel a chill run down my spine. I imagine my mother as a young girl, running through the dark forest, calling for help, and then sitting among all those people, listening to the healer's strong voice and the angry reactions of something they could not see. I imagine my aunt, first sitting in the bathroom carving the sink with a knife, then later lying in bed, tired and weak, slowly returning to herself after the spirit left. The story is like a shadow that follows me, and sometimes I wonder what that traveling spirit was doing before it found my aunt, and where it went after it left her. When I think back to my old house in the rural Philippines, the first feeling that comes to me is that quiet sense of always being watched. It was not always a scary feeling, not always heavy or dark, but it was there, like a pair of eyes just beyond the corner of my vision. The house itself was simple, made of wood and concrete, standing in the middle of wide open land. There were fields, trees, and a huge sky that turned gold in the late afternoons. Chickens would walk around the yard, dogs would bark now and then, and the air always smelled a little of soil, smoke from cooking, and sometimes fresh cut grass. Life there was slow and ordinary in many ways, but under that simple light there was always this strange layer, something I could not name when I was younger. I was told that when I was a small child I used to see things that other people could not see. My family would laugh a little when they told me the stories, but there was always a seriousness in their eyes too, like they were not joking completely. They said I would stand at the edge of the open field and wave happily at something or someone that, to them, was just empty space. I would smile, wave my hand up and down, sometimes even shout as if calling to a friend. When they asked me who I was waving at, I would give simple answers like, that person, or, the kid over there, pointing to a place where they saw nothing but grass and wind. At that age, I did not think anything was wrong. For me it was normal, as natural as talking to a neighbor or playing with a cousin. Childhood is like that sometimes. You do not question what you see. You just accept it as part of your world. Back then that strange feeling of being watched did not bother me much. It was part of my everyday life, like the shadow of the big tree near the house or the sound of the rooster in the morning. There were times when I would be playing outside and I would suddenly stop and feel like someone was standing a few steps behind me, just beyond my reach. When I turned around, there would be no one there, just the silent open field, the wooden fence, and the slow movement of leaves in the breeze. But I would shrug and go back to whatever I was doing. I think children get used to almost anything if they live with it long enough. Only much later, after I left that house and moved away, did I realize how strange that constant presence really was. It was only when that feeling disappeared in other places that I understood how strong it had been back home. One afternoon stands out clearly in my memory, like a scene from a movie that I keep replaying in my head. I was inside the house, just walking around and not really doing anything special. The sunlight at that time of day would enter through the windows in long, soft lines, lighting up dust in the air and making everything look a little golden. The house was quiet, no one was shouting, no radio was playing, and no one was cooking yet. I walked over to one of the windows and looked outside. From there I could see a good part of the yard and a little of the space beside the house. That was when I saw my grandmother. She was outside, in the open space, cleaning. She moved slowly and calmly, as she always did, sweeping or picking up something from the ground. Her clothes looked like the usual ones she wore around the house, and her posture was familiar, that slightly bent shape of an older woman who has worked hard all her life. For a moment, everything felt very normal. Seeing my grandmother cleaning outside was nothing new. She liked to keep things in order, and she always had something to do. But as I watched her, something started to feel off. I realized that while I was staring right at her, she never once turned her head toward my direction. Usually, if she was outside and I was looking from the window, she would wave or call my name, or at least glance at me. My grandmother was the kind of person who always noticed who was around. This time, she just continued what she was doing, eyes looking down or toward the ground in front of her, but never once in my direction. I stood there for a while, watching. An idea crossed my mind to shout, "Grandma!" or "Hi!" But something deep inside me stopped me. It was not shyness, and it was not anger. It was more like a quiet, cold instinct that whispered, "Don't call her. Don't say anything." It felt like my body understood something that my mind could not explain. It looked like her, it moved like her, but there was this heavy feeling that it was her, and yet not her at the same time, like seeing a reflection that was almost perfect but not quite right. The longer I watched, the stronger that feeling became, that she knew I was there behind the window, that she knew I was looking at her, but that she did not want to look back. It was like she was aware of me in some distant way but refused to acknowledge it. The air around me felt a little colder, and I noticed my heart beating faster. I did not see anything dramatic like her turning slowly with empty eyes or her body floating or disappearing. She just continued cleaning, and then after a while I turned away from the window. I walked to another part of the house, trying to push that strange scene out of my mind. I tried to tell myself that I was just imagining things, that maybe she was tired, or maybe she just did not notice me. Later that day, when the house was busier and my grandmother was inside, I casually asked her about it. I said something like, "Grandma, were you cleaning outside this afternoon?" I remember asking as if it did not really matter, but deep down I was waiting for her answer. She looked at me, surprised, and said, "No, I was sleeping all day." She said it in such a simple, normal way that at first I did not know how to react. She was sure. She did not pause or think or try to remember. She just said she had been asleep. That was when the quiet, uneasy feeling inside me grew bigger. I felt a strange chill run down my spine as the image of her cleaning outside replayed in my mind. If she was sleeping, then who was the woman I saw in the yard moving like her, wearing clothes like hers, giving me that strange sense of presence without ever looking at me? I did not tell her right away what I had seen. I just nodded and pretended that it was nothing important. Part of me did not want to scare her, and another part of me did not want to say the words out loud because somehow that would make it more real. Instead, I carried that incident quietly inside my memory. It became one of those stories that you keep tucked away in your mind, something you think about when you are alone, something that visits you in the late hours of the night. Only later, when I was older, did I slowly begin to talk about it with my family. As I grew up, I moved away from that house. Life took me to other places, and it was only after leaving that I realized how heavy the atmosphere had been sometimes. Whenever I came back to visit, little memories would rise, like bubbles in water, the feeling of being watched, the strange moments that I had brushed aside as a child. At some point, my grandmother herself began to talk more openly about the house. One day, she quietly mentioned to me that there was a ghost in the house. She did not say it in a dramatic way. She was just speaking softly, as if stating a fact, like saying there was a leak in the roof or a crack in the wall. She did not always explain what she had seen or felt, and I could not tell if she knew exactly who or what it was. It felt like she knew something but was not sure of all the details. Or maybe she simply did not want to say too much. I also asked my mother about the strange things that happened there, especially after I started connecting my own experiences with the stories I had been told as a child. My mother told me that she believed there was a child ghost in the house. She said it in a serious tone, not like she was telling a fairy tale, but as someone who had accepted that some things in this world cannot always be explained by simple logic. Hearing her say that made something click inside me. Suddenly, those memories of me waving into the empty field made more sense. Maybe I had not been waving into emptiness. Maybe someone had really been there, just not someone alive in the way we usually understand. Thinking that there might have been a child spirit around us made the whole atmosphere of my memories shift. It was still creepy, but in a strange way it also felt sad. A child is someone who should be laughing and playing, not wandering around unseen in an old house and open fields. It made me wonder who that child might have been, what had happened, and why it stayed there near us. The idea that a third sense, or some kind of sensitivity runs in my family does not seem so strange when I start putting together the stories I have heard from my parents and grandparents. Both my mom and dad's sides have their own tales of strange encounters. My father's story about the haystack is one that still makes me imagine the scene clearly in my mind, even though I was not there. He told me that when he was younger, he used to hang out on top of a haystack, high up, maybe 20 or 30 feet above the ground. For him, it was probably a quiet place to rest or daydream. One time, he fell asleep up there, with the sun warm on his skin and the sound of the countryside around him. He said he woke up slowly, his eyes still hazy and not fully focused, that half-awake state where dreams feel like they are still clinging to you. When he opened his eyes properly, the first thing he saw, directly in front of him, was a large black figure. It was very close, too close for comfort. The figure was completely dark, like a shadow shaped into a human form, but denser, heavier, not just absence of light. Where eyes should have been, there was nothing, no white, no color, just more darkness. It was looking at him, or at least he felt that it was looking straight at him, even without visible eyes. He said his heart almost stopped from fear. The shock of seeing something like that when you have just woken up, high up on a haystack with nowhere easy to run, must have been incredible. As soon as he realized what he was seeing, he did not stay to think or examine it more closely. He ran. Somehow, even from that height, he got down and ran as fast as he could, not looking back, not caring about anything else. He only remembered that when he fully came to his senses, it was already sunset, the sky turning orange and purple. He never forgot that black, eyeless figure looking at him in silence. Then there is my grandmother's own story, the one about the ball of fire. This one happened in a small province with very few people, where the nights are darker and quieter, and the stars feel closer. She was walking alone through a forested path on her way back home. It must have been evening or night, with only the faint light of the moon to guide her. She was familiar with the path, having walked it many times before, but that did not stop the forest from feeling mysterious and full of hidden things. As she walked, she noticed a light in the distance. At first, she might have thought it was someone carrying a lamp or a torch, but then she realized it was not like any normal light. It was a ball of fire, bright and burning, moving toward her through the darkness. It was not flickering like a candle in the wind, and it was not attached to anything. It was simply a glowing, fiery orb, drifting in her direction. The more it came closer, the more she understood that this was not something natural. Fear rose inside her quickly, strong and sharp. She did not wait to see what would happen if it reached her. She turned and ran, her feet pounding on the path, her breath quick and loud in her ears. The trees around her must have seemed like tall shadows closing in, but she did not stop. For her, that ball of fire was nothing less than a sign of something supernatural. Some people in our culture might call it a mysterious light, or connect it to local stories about spirits and wandering souls. For her, it was enough to know it was something she did not want to get close to. She ran for her life and never forgot the sight of that light cutting through the darkness toward her. Another of my father's experiences is less dramatic in its beginning but just as unsettling in how it turned out. He was a teenager then, walking alone toward a bridge at night. This was long before there were electric posts and bright streetlights in that area. People traveled under the pale glow of the moon or with small lamps if they had them. The dark felt deeper then, and shapes were harder to recognize from far away. As my father walked, he saw something ahead of him, a small, cute puppy sitting or standing near the path. In the soft moonlight, it must have looked harmless, and maybe even inviting. He was young, and like many young people, he liked animals. So of course he felt the urge to approach that little dog and maybe pet it or pick it up. There is something about a small, fluffy animal that makes people drop their guard. He started walking toward the puppy, his steps calm and maybe even a little excited. But as he got closer, something strange began to happen. The dog seemed to change. It started to grow, not in a natural, slow way, but in a way that made the hair on his arms stand up. The closer he came, the larger it appeared, as if his movement toward it was feeding its size. At first he tried to tell himself that it might just be his eyes adjusting to the light, or his imagination playing tricks in the dimness. But then it fully changed. It was no longer a cute, small puppy. It had become large, big enough to be frightening, with red eyes that shone unnaturally in the night. Those eyes seemed to burn right into him, and its barking was not the playful noise of a little dog but something deeper, more threatening, like an angry creature that did not belong to any normal category. That was the moment he realized he was not dealing with a regular animal. Fear took over, and just like with the black figure on the haystack, his reaction was simple and immediate. He ran as fast as he could, his heart racing, his body moving on pure instinct. Later, when he told the story, he would sometimes laugh a little and say that it was always about running in those situations, but beneath that laugh there was always a serious edge. Encounters like that leave a mark, a memory that stays deep inside you. Listening to all these stories together, the child me waving at something in an open field, the not quite my grandmother cleaning outside when she was supposedly asleep, the ghost child my mother said was in the house, the black eyeless figure my father saw on the haystack, the ball of fire chasing my grandmother on a forest path, and the puppy that grew into something monstrous with red eyes, makes it hard for me to simply dismiss everything as imagination or coincidence. It is true that not every strange sound or shadow means something supernatural, and it is easy for fear to make things worse, especially in the dark. But there is a thread that runs through all of these stories, a kind of pattern that suggests something else might be going on around us, something that most people do not see but that some in my family seem more sensitive to. When my mother says that a kid ghost was in the house, I think of that invisible friend I waved at as a child. When my grandmother quietly admits that there was a ghost in the house, I think of that day I saw her double outside, cleaning in silence, never turning to look at me. When my father talks about the black figure on the haystack or the changing puppy near the bridge, it feels connected somehow to that old strange mood that always hung around our old house and the land around it. Maybe there really is a third sense, running through our blood, some way of tuning into things that most people never notice. Or maybe it is part sensitivity, part culture, part stories passed down from one generation to another that shape how we see the world. Whatever the explanation is, those experiences are real to us. They are part of our family history, as real as birthdays, weddings, and ordinary days spent cooking and eating together. For some people, these stories might just be interesting tales to listen to at night. For me, they are pieces of a bigger picture, reminders that in that old rural house in the Philippines, and in the forests and fields around it, there were things moving and watching that were not always visible to the eye. Sometimes I think back to that afternoon when I looked out the window and saw my grandmother cleaning, and I still feel that strange, cold understanding that it was her, and yet it was not her. Sometimes I remember that, and I can almost feel again what it is like to live with the unseen, pretending it is normal because it is all you have ever known. My classmate, and not her real name, and I were in my dorm room at the university that night, both of us buried in our research papers, surrounded by books, notes, and the tired silence that only comes after a very long day. It was already past 2 in the morning, and the dorm was quiet except for the faint sounds coming from the hallway, and the soft hum of the electric fan. My 3 roommates had gone home for the weekend, so it was just the 2 of us in that small room. The air smelled a bit of paper, ink, and instant coffee. I had been sitting at my desk for hours, my back aching, eyes dry and heavy from reading and typing. At some point I finally finished my paper and felt a big wave of relief wash over me, the kind of tired happiness you feel when you know you can finally stop working. Anne, however, was still typing, focused on her own research, so I decided to lie down for a while on my bed while I waited for her to finish. I was used to staying up late by then. Sleepless nights were normal in that phase of my life, but my body was still exhausted. I stretched out on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft clacking of Anne's fingers on the keyboard, feeling the pain in my back slowly relaxing against the thin mattress. I did not really plan to sleep. I just wanted to rest and talk for a bit before we both called it a night. After maybe 10 minutes, and finally finished her paper too. She saved her work, turned off her laptop, and crossed the small room to my side. She lay down on the bed beside me, not too close but near enough so we could talk comfortably. We started chatting about our research topics, complaining about deadlines, laughing a little at how stressed we both were, and then talking about the next papers we still had to do. It was the usual kind of conversation you have when you are tired but relieved, with your mind still buzzing from work and your body begging for rest. While we were talking, something strange began to happen inside my own mind, and it is hard to explain it clearly even now. There were 3 words, very clear but not yet spoken, that began to swim around in my thoughts. They did not appear suddenly like a loud shout. Instead, it was as if they were quietly circling in the back of my mind, trying to catch my attention, like fish moving under the surface of water. At first I tried to ignore them. I could feel our conversation, feel the bed under my back, hear Anne's voice as we talked about our papers, but at the same time, in the background of all that, those 3 words kept floating around, as if they were waiting for me to notice them fully and accept them. It was not like remembering something from a lesson or a book. It felt different, like the words came from somewhere else and slipped into my mind without my permission. Even though I do not remember the words now, I know they had a strong presence, as if they carried weight and meaning on their own. Whenever I try to remember them now, it feels like there is a wall in my memory that I cannot pass through. It is like my mind pulls back, as if some silent part of me is afraid to bring them back completely. The closest thing I can say is that at that moment, as those words started to form in my thoughts, I somehow knew they were not normal words from my usual language. As I lay there looking at the ceiling, my eyes seeing the plain white surface but my inner sight, if I can call it that, watching the 3 words move inside my mind, I had a strange awareness about them. I recognized them as Latin, even though I never studied Latin in my life. It did not feel like a guess. It felt like my mind just accepted it as fact, as if I had always known what Latin sounds like and looks like, even if I had never taken any classes in it. It might sound strange, but it was like the part of me that still carried my Catholic background, from being baptized and raised in that religion, understood the shape of Latin without needing to think about it. I was no longer practicing Catholicism at that time, and I did not consider myself religious anymore, but the connection was still there in some deep place inside me. I did not try to say the words out loud. They just floated in my mind, and then, almost without thinking, I allowed myself to focus on them, to accept them, and in a way, to speak them silently within my head. The exact moment I did that, everything changed. The air around me suddenly felt different. It was as if I was being pulled into something, like being sucked or drawn down a narrow tunnel that I could not see with my physical eyes but could feel with my body and mind. The room did not move, but it felt like I did. The space around me grew tight and heavy, like the air itself had become thick and pressed close to my skin. It reminded me of being stuck inside a small, closed space where there is not enough air to breathe. The temperature rose quickly. It became very warm and humid, as if all the air in the room had turned into heavy steam pressing down on me, and I had no space to stretch or move. I tried to shift my body, to turn my head or lift a hand, but it felt like something invisible was holding me in place. It was not exactly like sleep paralysis, at least not how people usually describe it, but it had a similar sense of being trapped and unable to move freely. As all these strange sensations were happening, I was still trying to make sense of them. I wondered if I was just extremely tired, if I was half dreaming while still awake, or if I was experiencing something else that I did not have a name for. Then, in the middle of all that confusion, Anne suddenly spoke. Her voice came from beside me, close enough to hear clearly, but what she said did not match the situation. She said in Filipino, "Anong kailangan mo? Di mo ba alam na nagpapanga ako?" Which means, "What do you want? Don't you know I'm resting?" The moment she said that, my confusion deepened. She was talking to someone, but there was no one else in the room with us. Her tone was not playful or joking. It was firm, direct, as if she was answering a person who had disturbed her. I was still trying to process the heavy, suffocating feeling in the air when she spoke again. This time she said, "Nei te oki lang ako," which means, "Mom, Dad, I'm okay." And that was when I noticed something that still sends a chill through me when I remember it. Her voice sounded like two voices at the same time. I could hear her normal voice, the one I was used to, but layered under or over it, there was another voice, a male voice. They did not take turns speaking, they spoke together, as one. The sound was like hearing two people talking in perfect sync, overlapping in such a way that the sound merged into a single third kind of voice that was both of them and yet neither. It was not echo or distortion. It felt intentional, like two beings sharing one mouth. At the time, while it was happening, my mind was slow to catch up. I noticed it, but I did not react as quickly as you might imagine. I just lay there, listening, feeling the thick air, trying to understand what was going on. Only afterward, when I replayed the scene in my head, did I fully grasp how strange and frightening it really was. Right after she said those words to her parents, something else appeared, but this time it did not appear in the room. It appeared in my mind, as clearly as if I was looking at an actual photograph in front of me. It was as if my inner sight shifted from the edges of awareness to a sharp focus, like a camera lens turning. Suddenly, there was a picture filling my thoughts, detailed and bright. In that mental image, I saw three people, standing close together, all of them smiling at the camera. They looked like they were taking some kind of group or family picture. I remember that there was a woman on the left, and a man in the middle. The person on the right is harder for me to describe. I know that there was someone there, but when I try to remember their face or even their gender, my memory becomes fuzzy. It is like my mind took a clear snapshot of the center part of the picture and let the third person fade into the background. I have a vague feeling that the third person might have been younger, but I cannot say for sure. What I do remember more clearly is that they were all wearing light yellow clothes, like uniforms. The shade of yellow was soft and pale, not too bright. I had the impression that they might be work uniforms, maybe from an office or a company that required everyone to dress the same. I also seem to recall that there was some small text on the photo, a time and date in the lower right corner, the way some cameras print the date when a picture was taken. But the numbers and exact details did not stay in my memory. When I think of that image now, it is like looking at a slightly faded photograph. Three people, light yellow uniforms, smiling faces, the man in the middle drawing my attention more than the others. In that inner picture, my focus slowly moved closer to the man in the center, almost like my mental vision was zooming in on him. His smile, his face, the way he stood, it all became clearer and sharper while everything else stayed slightly blurred. I had the feeling that he was the most important person in that picture, or at least the one who wanted to be noticed. Then, just as suddenly as all of this had started, everything stopped. It was as if something had let go of me. The tight, heavy feeling in the air vanished. The warmth and humidity dropped away, and I felt cool air rush back in around me, filling my lungs, touching my skin. It felt like I had popped out of a small, dark tunnel into open space. I took a deep breath, and it felt like it was the first full breath I had taken in a long time, even though in reality only a short moment had passed. My body relaxed, and I could move again without feeling blocked or trapped. When I turned my attention back to the room, everything looked normal. The ceiling was the same plain ceiling. The fan was still turning. The door was closed. And was lying beside me and speaking normally again, as if nothing strange had just happened. She was talking about something ordinary, and her voice sounded like her own, with no trace of the overlapping male tone I had heard earlier. For a while after that, I kept very quiet. I did not say anything about what I had just experienced. I was trying to understand if I had fallen asleep and dreamed all of it in just a few minutes, or if I had actually remained awake the whole time. I wondered if I had simply been too tired from working on my paper and my mind had played a trick on me. It was easy to imagine that someone would say, You were exhausted, maybe half asleep, and your brain mixed up sounds and images. That is a simple explanation, and I understand why people would think that. But deep inside, I felt that what happened was more than just a dream or a tired hallucination. The feeling of being pulled into that warm, tight space, the overlapping voices, the clear, specific picture of 3 people in yellow uniforms, all of that felt too organized and meaningful, too sharp, to be just random images from a sleepy mind. I am not saying I have proof. I am only sharing how it felt to me, from inside my own body and thoughts. Time passed, but the memory stayed with me. I studied a discipline in the social sciences and had a minor in psychology. Because of that background, I know the many ways the mind can trick us and the different explanations that can be given to strange experiences. I know about stress, about dissociation, about how the brain sometimes constructs images and voices when we are overwhelmed or half asleep. I have even done personal research on the paranormal and metaphysics, reading theories, listening to testimonies, and trying to look at them with a careful mind. If I wanted to, I could sit down and examine my own experience like a case study and list all the possible psychological explanations. I could say I was overtired, that my brain created a symbolic image of a stranger, and imposed a voice answer inside my head that came from my own subconscious. I could say that and might have been talking in her sleep and I misheard her words in my half-awake state. But no matter how many rational labels I try to stick on it, the emotional weight of that moment remains. The details, the sequence, and the strong feeling of presence all insist on being remembered as something more. One thing that has always bothered me is the sense of guilt that lingers whenever I think of that man in the photograph and the words that were spoken through Anne. The message I heard was simple. He told his parents that he was okay. At the time, it did not seem like a clear request for help, just a statement, as if he wanted to reassure them. But whenever I think about it now, I feel like I was supposed to do something more. It is a strange feeling, because I do not even know who he was. He did not tell me his name, where he worked, or how he died. He did not show me any landmarks in the picture that could easily identify a place. All I had was the image of 3 people in yellow uniforms, smiling in a group photo, and a voice telling his mother and father that he was all right. I often find myself thinking that if it was real, if it was indeed some kind of spirit using that moment to pass a message, then he did not give me enough information to actually find his parents. I feel like someone handed me a letter with no address on it, and told me to deliver it. It is an impossible task, and yet I still sometimes feel bad for not being able to do it. There were times when I imagined going from house to house, asking people if they had a son who died, showing them a drawing of the man from the picture, or asking if they had a photo of 3 people in yellow uniforms taken together, smiling. Of course, in reality I never did that, because it would have been strange and people would probably think I had lost my mind. Still, that image stayed with me. Sometimes I would think of families in the Philippines who lost their son and never got a clear sign or closing message. I imagine parents sitting with their photo albums, looking at old pictures with dates printed in the corner. Every time that scene played in my mind, the guilt would come back. I would argue with myself. Maybe it was all in your head, so there is nothing to feel guilty about. Then another part of me would answer, but what if it was real? What if those 3 Latin words opened something? What if his parents are still waiting? It has been almost a decade since that night, and I still remember it clearly. I decided to share the story not because I want people to think I have some special gift or that I want attention, but because keeping it inside has made the guilt and confusion heavier over time. I thought that maybe by telling it, by letting the story exist outside my own mind, I might feel a little lighter. I am not here to force anyone to believe in ghosts or possessions or spiritual messages. I understand completely if someone reads this and decides it was just stress, lack of sleep, or a confused dream. I also know that some people will read it and recognize something familiar in it, perhaps from their own experiences. For me, this is simply what I lived through that night in my dorm room. If the man in the picture was indeed a real person, and if he really did use that brief moment to say something to his parents, then at least his words are out in the open now, repeated in another voice. If by some very small chance there is a family out there who has a photo like the one I described, a woman, a man in the center, and another person, all wearing light yellow clothes, smiling at the camera. And if that family has lost the man in the middle, then maybe hearing that simple message, "Mom, Dad, I'm okay," might bring them a little comfort. As for the 3 Latin words that started everything, I have tried to remember them many times. I even asked a few people in the past if they had any idea what kind of Latin phrases could open a connection like that, but nothing solid ever came from those attempts. These days, I no longer try. When I push myself to remember, it feels like something inside me pulls back in fear, like my own mind saying, "Stop. You do not need to know this again." And honestly, I respect that feeling now. I feel safer not remembering them. I have done enough research on strange things to know that curiosity has its limits, especially for someone like me who admits to being a big scaredy cat when it comes to direct experiences with the unknown. Even though I keep an open mind and still think about spiritual matters often, I do not actively look for more encounters like that night. Once was enough to last me a long time.